The Pittsburgh Steelers were thought to maybe be more interested in addressing their offensive line going into the NFL draft when the NFL season ended last year. But are are they in a better place, even though their main additions have just been through free agency? We'll talk about that and who might be their best chances to changing the tone of the offensive line right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Joining me today is Brian Backo of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our breaking news updates and our bonus episodes that come out on the weekends. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Joining me today, as I said earlier, is Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You know him, you love him. You've heard him on this show. You hear him on Steelers Radio. You hear him everywhere. Brian's all over the place with his Steelers coverage. He's amazing. Brian, thanks for coming back to the show. How you doing?
Appreciate those kind words, Chris. I'm doing well, man. I am. My heart's hurting a little bit. We got to pour some out for T. Gray Scales. Right before we fired this up, the Steelers made a few roster moves, cutting legendary players that you've certainly heard of. Gray Scales, Isaiah Johnson, and a long snapper, Rex Sunahara, maybe? I don't know exactly. Rex, we hardly knew ye.
So literally, we hardly knew. He says Sunahara, maybe.
You hate to call these things minor moves because these dudes are trying to make a living out here. But yeah, I mean, it's not like these were three guys who were going to be in the mix come September. Just a random Tuesday afternoon news dump by the Steelers.
But that's the nature of the business. To if you're reporting on them or if you're a fan of them, you're like, okay, really, does that do anything? But it is tragic for these people who this is their lives. They're like this. You're trying to make an NFL roster, and these things do matter in the long run. So I get what you're saying there. That is crazy. But Brian, we're happy to have you here. I want to talk about the offensive line because everyone's talking about all the Steelers playmakers they got. They drafted Kenny Pickett. They signed Mitch Trubisky. George Pickens is in there. They got Calvin Austin. Najee Harris is back. Pat Fryermuth. All the playmakers. Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. Everyone's excited for how young that group is and the prospects of how talented it is. But there was a lot of emphasis at the end of the regular season what would happen to the offensive line. And there was a lot of talk about maybe Tyler Linderbaum or Zion Johnson or those guys. But then they went and signed James Daniels. They signed Mason Cole. They brought back Chukwuma Okorafor. And now they're sitting in a position where they didn't address the offensive line in the NFL draft. And now we're talking about that group plus, Kendrick Green, Kevin Dotson, Dan Moore Jr., those guys, J.C. Hassenhauer was brought back into the fold. Those are the guys that you're looking at becoming the Steelers offensive line next year. Is there a sense of confidence that Steelers fans should feel with those signings and maybe guys being healthier and growing a little bit that the Steelers will be a better offensive line unit to the point where fans can look at it and say, okay, that's visibly, noticeably better?
Oh, man, diving deep on the offensive line and during the May doldrums. That's why you bring me on as a grinder to get it. But no, in all honesty, it's a very significant discussion for this team. I mean, we know that the O-line is an important component of any offense, and specifically as it pertains to the Steelers, it certainly wasn't there last year, and even over the last few years, that unit was slipping, and they got some fresh blood in there in 2021. Feel like this time a year ago having similar discussions, and it was, well, they can't be any worse, can they? And
and then they were
kind of worse. So I mean, it's certainly in pass pro and things like that with younger guys coming in, they were worse. But I just thought that the writing was on the wall for how they were going to handle this when early in the offseason, Steelers GM Kevin Colbert said that his one kind of regret from 2020 offseason was not doing more, or I guess I should say the 2021 offseason was not doing more in free agency and bringing in another veteran maybe for that O-line. Eventually they had to when David DeCastro's situation cropped up, and they went out and got Trey Turner in June. So they were left scrambling a little bit, but even prior to that, they had an opportunity to hit that first wave of free agency and get some get some experienced new blood in there. They really didn't do that. And, he didn't say that he regretted not investing more draft resources into it. So I think it was pretty obvious that they were going to do more in free agency with the line, and James Daniels and Mason Cole certainly qualify. I was a little surprised that they didn't do much of anything for it with their 7 picks in the draft, though.
So would you agree that they still, even with the idea that, okay, they maybe feel confident about this, but that they should have done more? Because again, you look at the offensive line, Kendrick Green, however you feel about him as a center for next year, he's in the lineman as well. Maybe Mason Cole or JC Hassenhauer overtake him, but there was no new major offensive tackle added to the mix. James Daniel is your guy who could be a guard / center, but probably a more of a guard there to fill in as a younger, more in his prime version of what they hoped Trey Turner could be, at least as a stopgap guy. Did they kind of sell themselves short on this and say, you know what, well, these are just the players that are available to us in the NFL draft, this is what we're going with, and kind of leave themselves with the short end of the stick with the line group?
I mean, I think their needs in the draft were pretty apparent. And, the one nit that I would maybe pick is just that offensive tackle position. I think that would have been ripe for trying to take a big swing on a guy, maybe with some tools or some untapped potential. Maybe he never works out, but at least you have somebody else kind of in the pipeline. Then again, Chris, maybe they feel good about Chukwuma Okorafor and Dan Moore Jr. I mean, Moore came in and it was sink or swim for him as a rookie 4th rounder. And, he was up and down, I think, but he did, he started every game until getting injured late and missed that week 18 game against the Ravens. But I mean, he was durable. I think he was better than a lot of people expected. Going back to training camp, there was never much of a thought that he was going to be needed. And then, Zach Banner's circumstances changed, and he was never a part of the equation, unfortunately for him. And they bring back Chooks, which I think was another surprise to some degree, but he's still pretty young. I was looking this up. Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, who was one of the top tackle prospects in that second tier in this draft. Maybe on paper you look at it and say, why wouldn't the Steelers go get a guy like that? He's less than a year younger than Chukwuma Okorafor. So, I mean, there is still some upside, I guess, in Chooks going into year 5 here. But I thought that it would have been nice to see them go with somebody who maybe they can develop at tackle. And if all goes well, maybe he even, supplants Joe Haeg as kind of the swing tackle on the O-line.
Yeah, certainly will be interesting. We'll see how that develops, but we're not done talking about the offensive line. I'm gonna get Brian to give me an answer on who is the guy. Is there a guy on the offensive line for the Steelers that makes the biggest difference? We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, got to talk to you guys about Built Bar. With summer right around the corner, it's May. It's getting nice outside. It's sunny. It's hot. You're going to start taking more adventures and being on the go. And so when you're on the go, you need to pack Built Bars right along with you. You can throw them in your bag, throw them in your kids' backpacks. If you're going out on summer trips, it's the best way to have healthy and delicious options ready and available for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. And that means Built Bars are going to be something you can eat healthily and enjoy while you do it. If you haven't tried the Built Puffs yet, everyone's going crazy for them. They're amazing. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallows. And they come in crazy flavors like banana cream pie and even churro. And if you don't want to eat a puff bar that's tasted like churro, you're missing out right now, and they're only at 140 calories. But if that's not enough flavor for you, you can get the mix box, which gives you 12 different flavors of bars and puffs delivered right to your door when you visit built.com. My personal favorite is double chocolate. You get the outer chocolate layer, you get the inner chocolate layer, and you get the full Built Bar. And again, you're talking about Built Bars that are only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein, compared to the average candy bar that's 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs. It's clear what's the better and healthier option for you. And with built.com, you'll find all the flavors like double chocolate, mint chocolate, raspberry, orange, banana cream pie, all these different flavors available to you. So go to built.com right now and use the locked on promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15, LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your next order when you visit built.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Brian Batko, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Okay, Brian, I have the guy that I've been saying, since they signed him. I didn't think that they would actually get him in free agency. But when they went and got James Daniels, a lot of my friends who are Bears people, they cover the Bears, they talk about the Bears, they worship the Bears, whatever. That was the, oh no, how did they let that guy get away signing for the Steelers when they saw that? And they were like, this is bad for us. But your early ideas and for us, what you've heard and what you've seen, is he a guy who can be the anchor that he's the guy that leads the group forward and changes everything? Or is he just another piece in the puzzle, and that anchor is maybe a first-round pick or someone else that they need to add in the near future?
I think ideally you still add that guy, but maybe James Daniels can be that. And I think it's a little bit frustrating for some fans when it comes to the Steelers O-line, because we were talking about this last year in the offseason, Chris, when we were kicking around these same kind of questions. Who's going to be the leader of this group? Who's going to kind of pull everybody up and set the standard? There was some hope that it'd be Zach Banner. And again, injuries and just, he wasn't able to get on the field last year. You hope somebody like him, such a good guy, lands on his feet. And I think he could have been that last season if he'd have been healthy. Now you fast forward and, I don't think Kendrick Green really was able to step into that role because he was still figuring it out. Position change, third rounder who really had to get a baptism by fire, to say the least. I don't think he was playing well enough to kind of take on that mantle, which you'd usually want your center to do. We'll see if Mason Cole can bring some of that veteran stability. But I do think that James Daniels is the one I look at and say, if he's able to come in here and hit the ground running, play well, clearly be the best player on that line, which everything on paper tells us he should be, then he can also lead. I think Chukwuma Okorafor can kind of be a little bit of a leader too. He's been here a long time now, and he's going into his third year as a starter. Mike Tomlin, when this came up in training camp last year, said that he wasn't going to force anything, that it needs to happen organically. I'm not so sure it happened. I think Craig Turner was kind of shoehorned into that by necessity. And now, you see he's not even here anymore. So, having it happen organically is nice, but I do wonder if there's going to be a little bit more of a sense of urgency for somebody like James Daniels to kind of grab the bull by the horns with that group and be their guy.
That's where I think that they're hoping for. And I'm not so sure. I'm not sure if James Daniels is that guy. I'm not sure if he's that kind of a leader. I do like his tape. I do like what he's developed into as a player. He's a former second-round pick, and a guy that's shown, to be adept at moving around the offensive line. The Bears moved him all over the place in the interior. So I like the prospect of adding him. But that's why I asked that question, because like you said, this offensive line was supposed to be different last year. It was just not in the good way. And now you're sitting in a situation where a year later after that, you really only made some interior additions. You're not looking at much different, but you're hoping that you can change a lot of things. Now, there are aspects of this that could also change, because part of the pressure that was on the offensive line, and we talked about this a lot last year, was having an immobile quarterback, which Ben Roethlisberger was. And when you have an immobile quarterback, it limits you in what you're able to do, different blocking schemes you're able to perform that can allow the guy to stretch out to his right, stretch out to his left. Or, when you give up a pressure, that's curtains for your offense, because the guy's not, Ben Roethlisberger, even though he did escape a couple times last year, he was not in his prime escapability mode where he was able to dodge a guy, shove off Terrell Suggs, and throw a ball down the field. So I guess my other question is, do you think it's reasonable for the Steelers to look at this and say, you know what, we've added to every other position over the past year or so. This is going to be enough to sort of balance out the problems with the offensive line, so that now when they give up those kind of mistakes, we have enough skilled playmakers, whether in the backfield or downfield, to make a difference there.
I think one other factor that we haven't even mentioned, Chris, is they do have a new coach. They've got a new O-line coach in Pat Meyer, and it's really hard to gauge, the coaching jobs done by position coaches and assistants. You're not really in that room. It's difficult to really evaluate how someone's doing. But I think when you just look at what we do know, Adrian Clem, he ends up leaving for the Oregon job last year before the season was even over. They promote Chris Morgan, his assistant, to the interim. I just think that, that duo of Clem and Morgan, I don't know how you could say they did a great job with Kendrick Green. That's somebody who came in with a little bit of rawness to him at center. Had a lot of the physical traits that you'd want, but didn't develop as a rookie. Yeah, Dan Moore, I guess, was a little bit of a success story, but maybe Pat Meyer, with a lot of years of NFL experience, can be a better glue for that unit and kind of help them develop. And yeah, they're going to be learning on the job, as you alluded to, with a new quarterback. I don't know if it's going to be a rookie quarterback, but it could be in Kenny Pickett. And I think Najee Harris will take on a leadership role for the offense as a whole. But there is kind of a void in terms of your quarterback position, your O-line, your wide receiver room. So it's another offseason of transition for the Steelers, and the O-line is no different. But yeah, they go from being a unit that just needs to hold up their end of the bargain to one that might need to pave the way.
I agree. That's kind of where they're at. I mean, the last time this Steelers team won a Super Bowl was when the offensive line was just, hey, just do your best, guys. Like, oh, hang in there. Ben Roethlisberger and Santonio Holmes, Hines Ward, and they'll get the job done. Heath Miller and all those guys, and the defense will primarily win the games. All you guys have to do is not stink. And that might be what they're asking of this crew. Now, they also might be asking, hey, with Najee Harris, you guys have to be more imposing, because this isn't going to be like Willie Parker in those years. He had been a Steelers important running back, but in 2008, he was more so the guy that was left over while they were kind of changing their dynamics of their offense. Jeff Hardings was gone. Alan Faneca was gone. They were rebuilding that line entirely. And Willie Parker was kind of the leftover undrafted running back who just overperformed. But you saw when the early 2010s started, when they added those pieces and then they got Le'Veon Bell, the running game was crucial to what they were doing on offense. You get the feeling that when you draft a guy in Najee Harris, that he's going to need to be part of that, being crucial, being part of that importance to the Steelers offense. And it makes me wonder, is it possible for him to help negate that? Or is this still going to be something that this time next year, we're going to be sitting there saying, well, that was another bad year of Steelers offensive line play. What are they going to do now? Not draft another center or guard in the first round?
I think it's as simple as, a mobile quarterback can help you out. A running back who, as Kevin Colbert, I think, called him, was with Najee Harris when they drafted him, who can be his own blocker. That helps you out. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be a team predicated on defense and, running the football and kind of shortening games to a degree in what's going to be a really, I think, wide open AFC, then you need some guys who are going to be able to block some people and, as you said, impose their will. And the jury is very much out on whether these Steelers can do that.
We'll see if they can do that, and that'll be a big story as we see things start to open up. But the question that everyone's asking about is the quarterback position. I know I've talked about the quarterbacks since Kenny Pickett's been drafted and Mitch Trubisky's been signed, but we haven't had a chance to talk to Brian. We're going to get his thoughts on that situation and that coming camp battle that also includes Mason Rudolph right after this, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Okay, Brian, on the spot, everything's on the line right now. Your credibility as a beat writer and everything. Who's the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers on week 1 of the season? If you're wrong, we hold it against you for the rest of your life.
Luckily, I have no credibility, so there's not much at stake here. But, hey, look, I think what people keep forgetting is we're going to have an entire training camp in preseason. Sort this thing out. And it's three preseason games now as opposed to 4. But, you're going to get a chance to see these guys in live action. You don't have to figure out who's the starter if the season started tomorrow. But I also understand that a big part of what we do in this business is speculate, project, forecast, make predictions. So my prediction, Mr. Carter, is I do think that Mitch Trubisky will be under center week 1 against whoever that is. It probably won't be at Heinz Field based on the Pirates schedule. Right. They're never opening at home. But, I think it's Trubisky. And I think, like any placeholder veteran quarterback who just had a first-round pick brought in behind him, he's probably going to be on a pretty short leash.
I agree with that entirely. And of course, I'm being facetious when I ask Brian that question for those who might not see our faces or get our tone if you're listening to this audio on Apple or Spotify or anywhere. But point being, and I've made this a lot, never try to, like, I've heard so many, oh, Kenny Pickett has to start right away, otherwise he was a waste of a draft pick. Are you out of your mind? Ben wasn't a starter right away. Josh Allen wasn't a starter right away. Patrick Mahomes wasn't a starter right away. And Aaron Rodgers wasn't a starter right away. It's been that for 20 years, and we think it's going to change now. No, it's even more than 20 years since like the start of this league. Unless you are a phenom and you have everything in place, and still more things have to go in line for you, you most likely don't start your first year as a quarterback in the NFL, at least the entire season long. But
no,
I do
about you. It doesn't even matter if you're a phenom. Sometimes your team has no better option. Sometimes your team hasn't prepared anybody else to really be in position to start at quarterback. That's not what the Steelers have done. That's never really how they roll at any position, and QB was no different. They went out and signed Mitch Trubisky, and I don't look at it as a necessarily a wasted signing. I just think they cover their bases the way they would at left guard for the most part, and now there will be a true camp competition to see who comes out on top. And I think it'll be interesting because I think they're slightly different players, Pickett and Trubisky, but I think they're more similar than they are different. So that just makes it incumbent on them to separate one from the other.
And I agree with that here. And we're going to roll back to those two in just a second. But I want to ask you, Brian, about the other quarterback in the room, Mason Rudolph. And a lot of people are saying, are questioning, should they trade him? Should they get rid of him? Just get rid of him. You don't need him, right? You got Mason, you got Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, and you drafted Chris Oladikin. Why do you even need Mason Rudolph? I don't know about you, and I guess I want to gauge if you agree with me on this. I don't think, unless some team comes with a 3rd round pick or something crazy like that for Mason Rudolph, I'm from the Steelers. I'm not trading him. You don't know if Mitch Trubisky's going to be good. You don't know if Kenny Pickett's going to be good. And even if they are, just 3 years ago, we were sitting here talking about Devlin Hodges having to be the starter because Ben went down. They traded away Josh Dobbs, and then Mason went down, and then you were down to a 4th-string undrafted rookie out of Samford. They don't want to be there again. I think even if Mason Rudolph doesn't, if he's in fact the 3rd quarterback on the depth chart, he stays on this roster because they need to be prepared if something bad happens on top of the injuries. Say these guys fall into a slump and they just need a new arm out there.
To play devil's advocate, though, I mean, there's only so many resources you can devote to any position roster. You can't, stock up 10 good receivers because of people who might get hurt. I know that's not a perfect comparison, but
I hear you.
With Rudolph, I mean, if I can get even a late round pick, a 5th, a 6th, I'd probably do it. I know you said you'd want a team to come with a 3rd or 4th maybe for that, but I think with him, he could use a change of scenery. I think it's pretty clear that the Steelers wanted a change of scenery at the quarterback position and not just from their future Hall of Fame number 7. So if I'm him, I don't really know that I'd want to be here. I probably don't want to be on the sideline in street clothes every game of my 5th NFL season, even if I'm getting $5 million to do it. So, I mean, these things tend to work themselves out somewhat naturally. I mean, it's not happening for Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, but that's a very different, set of circumstances there. So I just think it's, I mean, if you can get anything for him, I'd be willing to make that move. Chris Oladokun, I don't know what's going to become of him at all, but I mean, there's a couple guys out there on the market, free agency wise, that you could kind of backfill if you do move Mason Rudolph. So I don't think he's going to be really in the mix. I think he's kind of just a distant 3rd, but hey, like you said, I guess there's a universe in which those top 2 guys, Pickett and Trubisky, really stink it up, but I think they're much better fits for Matt Canada's offense.
I agree with that entirely. And again, I'm not saying that Mason Rudolph's going to be the number 2 quarterback or he even see time this year. I sometimes wonder, because I remember the Steelers used to primarily carry 5 wide receivers on the roster, and then they had, I think it was the 2016 season when AB was the only one available because Marcus Wheaton was hurt, Martavis Bryant was suspended, Sammy Coates had broken hands. They were down to Kobe Hamilton and Darius Hayward-Bay and Eli Rogers as the only options behind Antonio Brown. And I think that they've operated since then. We're going to have 6 guys that we're confident with putting out there, at least being competitive in some way, shape, or form. And I think with the quarterback position, there's a chance they can do that. But you're absolutely right. Over allocating resources to a position can be a problem. And they could, if they can get something out of him, I don't think that they would turn that opportunity down. But back to Trubisky and Pickett. You talked about their main differences. What are the positive differences for each guy or the difference that might make you look at one guy over the other?
Yeah. I think with Pickett, I mean, the first edge clearly is just he's younger. I mean, there's inherently more upside with a 24-year-old quarterback than a 27-year-old quarterback. Trubisky has kind of, I don't necessarily want to say tried and failed at the NFL level, but I mean, it didn't go the way that he wanted it to in Chicago or the way the Bears wanted it to by virtue of them letting him walk and not picking up his option. So, Pickett hasn't had that chance yet against pro level players. I think that's one thing that stands out. And I also think that Pickett's maybe a better pure pocket passer. Now with Trubisky, can he give you a little bit more with his legs than Kenny Pickett? Is he a little bit better natural athlete? I'd give him a slight edge there. Again, though, any perceived strength for one over the other is pretty slight, I think. So there's a reason why they were both first-round picks. They're talented guys. They can move. They can throw on the run. I think they're pretty accurate. Maybe I'd give a slight edge to Pickett in that regard, but it's hard to compare when he's coming from the college level and Trubisky's accuracy issues cropped up a little bit more in the NFL. So that's going to be one storyline to watch really throughout this entire preseason process. But, what Trubisky has in experience, I think Pickett is going to have in kind of maybe fearlessness and just a willingness to kind of cut it loose as a first rounder who's coming in here and doesn't know what he doesn't know about the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with that entirely. And one thing that I've talked about, it might not even be a lot of people like the speed of the total understanding or seeing the field and those type of things. I think that Kenny Pickett will adapt to a playbook, but adapting to the speed of the players, how longer they are, how quicker they are, how smarter defensive backs are and defenses are. Those are things that Kenny Pickett is going to have to catch up on, whereas Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky will both have legs up in that department. I am interested to see how that plays out in this competition. But again, this is why I facetiously opened this segment with kind of try to sort of put you on the spot about the quarterback. We don't know how these guys are going to react. We don't know how Mitch Trubisky is right now. He sat on the bench behind Josh Allen all last year. He may have lost everything. We don't know. Kenny Pickett, he could ascend to being amazing. He could be terrible. The whole point of this was to have four camp arms, and at least three guys who you could say, all right, we know who Mason Rudolph is. He's a guy that's been around, and you're paying him money to stick around. These are two guys that are outside of our system, but we like their moxie. We like their tools. We'll see if we can work with them. That at least gives you a fighting chance to find that guy in training camp who will at least be your starter when you open up the season and maybe progress forward with him or find the other answer on the depth chart. Those are all things I think are going to happen here, Brian. But it's certainly going to be the story when rookie camp opens this Friday.
Big picture, they are all relatively cheap as far as NFL quarterbacks go, and they're probably going to be doing a lot of handing off to number 22, regardless of who it is, and that is going to be the recipe for the Steelers having some success here in 2022.
Certainly it will be. Matt Canada is going to be a lot of scrutiny on how he handles it, but it's going to be a young group that he works with. We'll see how that plays out. Thanks so much, Brian, for making time to come here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We always appreciate when you take your time and you do great work with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris. Right there on Twitter, it's just my name, Brian Batko. You can check out post-gazette.com. Like you said, we'll have plenty of content coming from rookie minicamp this weekend. And you can also find the Pod of Steel on the Post-Gazette's North Shore Drive podcast network with Ray Fittipaldo and me.
That is a good pod. You guys are a good team to listen to there. So do check out Brian and all of his work. Follow him on all the social medias. Thanks so much for Brian for coming on. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Watch this show on YouTube. Like it if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well as all of our feeds: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and everywhere else. We'll be back tomorrow with more from Wes Euler of Steeler Nation Radio talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers.